Do you know what year you plan to retire? Not what your balance is, not which funds you hold, not whether you have a Roth or a traditional IRA, just the year. Because that single number, the calendar year when you stop working and start withdrawing, may matter more to the long-term survival of your retirement than almost any financial decision you have ever made. And almost nobody talks about it. I want to introduce you to two people. They never met. They never compared notes. They live in different states, and they have nothing in common except this. Both of them did everything right. Richard was 63 years old. He lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and had spent 31 years as a high school principal. He retired on December 31st, 1999, the last day of the millennium, with $500,000 in his traditional IRA, a withdrawal plan of $25,000 per year, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who had saved carefully and consistently for 3 decades. 5% of his portfolio per year. He had run the numbers. It seemed conservative. Sylvia was 63 years old. She lived in Madison, Wisconsin, and had spent most of her career as a hospital administrator. She retired in January of 2003, exactly 3 years and 1 month after Richard, with $500,000 in her traditional IRA and an identical withdrawal plan of $25,000 per year. Same balance, same percentage, same discipline, same everything. By 2010, Richard's portfolio had been cut nearly in half despite his careful withdrawals. Sylvia's was substantially intact and growing. By 2016, Richard's retirement plan was in serious trouble. Sylvia's portfolio had recovered and grown well beyond its starting point. They did the same things. They saved the same amount. They withdrew the same percentage. The only difference between Richard and Sylvia was 3 years. Here is how that is possible. Have you ever heard the phrase sequence of returns risk? Most people in their 60s haven't. And that gap in knowledge is one of the most expensive blind spots in retirement planning. Because this is a risk that cannot be avoided by saving more, investing more carefully, or choosing better funds. It is a risk that is built into the timing of when markets move. Here is what it means in plain terms. The order in which you experience market returns during retirement matters enormously, far more than the average return over a long period. 2 portfolios can have identical average returns over 20 years and produce completely different outcomes, depending on whether the bad years came early or late. When Richard retired at the end of 1999, the S&P 500 dropped more than 9% in 2000, more than 11% in 2001, and more than 22% in 2002. 3 consecutive years of losses, right at the beginning of his retirement, right when he was taking his first withdrawals. Here is the mathematics of why that is so destructive. In year 1, the market falls 9% on Richard's $500,000. Before he takes his withdrawal, his balance has already dropped to roughly $454,000. He takes his $25,000 withdrawal. He ends the year with $429,000, not $500,000. In year 2, the market falls again. 11% of $429,000 is a loss of $47,000. Before his withdrawal, he has $382,000. After his withdrawal, he has $357,000. In year 3, the market falls 22%. He loses another $78,000 on a portfolio that is already seriously depleted. After his withdrawal, he has $231,000, less than half of what he started with after only 3 years. And here's the part that makes sequence of returns risk genuinely different from ordinary market risk. Those shares Richard sold to fund his withdrawals in years 1, 2, and 3. They are gone. They were sold at depressed prices. When this market eventually recovered in 2003 and beyond, Richard no longer owned those shares. He could not participate in the recovery with the full portfolio he started with. His baseline had been permanently reduced. Sylvia retired into the recovery. Her first 3 years of retirement saw positive returns. Her portfolio grew before she began making meaningful withdrawals. When downturns eventually came, she had a larger cushion, a larger base, and a portfolio that had already demonstrated its ability to produce returns. The same market, the same funds, the same withdrawal rate. 3 years earlier or later made the entire difference. Here is what to do about this right now. Before you retire, or if you have already retired, before your next annual review, calculate your actual withdrawal rate. Divide your planned annual withdrawal by your current portfolio balance. If that number is above 4.5%, you are in territory where sequence risk becomes a serious concern. If it is above 5%, you need to have a specific conversation with a financial advisor about sequence risk before you take another withdrawal. Now let me explain why this gets worse for couples. Because most discussions of sequence of returns risk treat it as an individual problem, and it is not. You have probably heard the phrase the 4% rule. It is a guideline developed by financial planner William Bingen in 1994, based on historical market data, suggesting that withdrawing 4% of your portfolio per year gives you a very high probability of your money lasting 30 years. That research is real, and the guideline is useful. But there is an assumption buried inside it that most people never examine. The 4% rule assumes a single portfolio with a single withdrawal stream. When 2 spouses retire simultaneously, both stopping work in the same year, both drawing income from the same portfolio, the pressure on that portfolio in a bad sequence is compounded. 2 people drawing down a shared portfolio during a 3-year downturn is not the same risk as one person doing so. The depletion happens faster. The shares sold at low prices are more of them. The recovery that eventually comes has less to work with. And there is a survivor dimension to this that almost nobody considers when they are planning their retirement date together. If the portfolio is seriously depleted by a bad sequence in the first 5 years of joint retirement, the surviving spouse, who may live another 15 or 20 years, inherits a permanently weakened financial foundation. The sequence risk that seemed manageable at 63 can become a genuine crisis at 78. Here is what to do about this right now. If you and your spouse are planning to retire in the same year, ask yourselves whether it is possible, practically, financially, personally, for one of you to work even 1 or 2 additional years. Not because your savings are inadequate, because staggering your retirement dates reduces the window during which both of you are withdrawing simultaneously during a potential downturn. It is one of the lowest cost, highest impact adjustments available to couples approaching retirement, and almost no one considers it. This brings us to the third part, and the one that actually gives you something concrete to act on, regardless of when you retire. Financial planners sometimes call this a guardrail strategy. Here is what that means. Instead of committing to a fixed withdrawal amount regardless of what the market does, you build flexibility into your plan from the beginning. You establish a target withdrawal, say 4% per year, and you also establish 2 guardrails. If your portfolio grows beyond a certain level, you allow yourself to withdraw slightly more. If it drops below a certain level, you temporarily reduce your withdrawal by 10 to 15% until it recovers. This is not about deprivation. A 10% reduction in annual spending for 1 or 2 years is not a crisis for most retirees. It is a manageable adjustment. What it prevents is the irreversible depletion of shares sold at low prices during a downturn. The exact mechanism that turned Richard's carefully constructed retirement plan into a years-long struggle. The second concrete protection is a cash buffer. Before you retire, not after the market drops, build 2 years of living expenses in cash, money market funds, or short-term stable assets outside your equity portfolio. When the market falls 30% in year one of your retirement, you draw from the cash buffer rather than selling equities at depressed prices. You give your portfolio time to recover. The shares stay in the portfolio. They participate in the recovery. The sequence risk is interrupted before it compounds. The third protection is what advisors call sequence-aware asset allocation. This is not the same as simply owning more bonds because you are older. It is a deliberate positioning of the portion of your portfolio you will need in the first 5 years of retirement, the highest risk years for sequence damage, in more stable assets, while allowing the portion you will not need for 10 or 15 years to remain in growth-oriented investments. The portfolio is structured around the timeline of when you need the money, not just around your age, for your specific retirement year, your specific withdrawal amount, and your specific portfolio composition. A fee-only financial advisor can run what is called a Monte Carlo analysis, a simulation that models your plan against thousands of different historical market sequences and tells you the probability of your money lasting as long as you need it to. That conversation is worth having before you retire, not after your first bad year. Here is what to do about this right now. If retirement is within 5 years, start building your cash buffer today. 2 years of expenses, outside your equity portfolio, earning what it earns in a money market or short-term bond fund, not optimized, just stable. That buffer is the single most effective protection against sequence risk available to someone in your position, and it costs nothing except the decision to start building it. Richard and Sylvia never met. They never compared notes. They simply retired in different years. But the distance between their outcomes is not a mystery. It is math. And unlike most financial risks, this one has a specific known solution. It requires no market prediction. It requires no financial genius. It requires only understanding that the order of your returns matters, and building a plan that accounts for that before the sequence begins. I want to ask you one question before you close this video, and I want you to sit with the answer honestly. If the market dropped 30% in the first 2 years after you retired, and you still needed to take your full withdrawal every year to cover your expenses, would your portfolio survive? Not theoretically, not on average. Specifically, your portfolio, your withdrawal amount, your expenses, your sequence. Do you know the answer to that question? Because Richard didn't, and Sylvia didn't either. The only difference between them is which side of the answer they ended up on. And by the time Richard found out, the sequence had already done its work. Before this video disappears from your screen, I would like to ask you something in the comments. What year are you planning to retire? Or if you have already retired, what year did you stop working? You do not have to share your balance or your fund choices or anything personal, just the year. Because understanding where you are in the market cycle is the first step toward understanding your own sequence risk. And because I want to know how many of you are approaching retirement in the years just ahead. If this video gave you something new to think about, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Every week, we cover the financial decisions that matter most to people in the years around retirement, the ones that protect what you have built before the math has a chance to work against you.